In a small, peaceful village, where a clear river flowed like a silver ribbon, there lived an old farmer named Thomas and his wife, Grace. Their lives were simple, almost beautifully ordinary. Their cottage had a straw roof that whispered in the wind, a tiny garden that grew just enough vegetables, and chickens that pecked lazily in the yard. Every morning, as the sun softened the sky, Thomas and Grace walked together to the river with an old wooden bucket. Thomas had once been strong enough to lift anything the land demanded, but time had bent his back and softened his grip. His hands now trembled, and his knees complained each time he climbed the small hill by their home. Grace, though slower in her steps, carried a quiet brightness in her eyes, a steady calm that made the simple mornings feel sacred. As they moved along the familiar path, they didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The river knew their stories, and the rhythm of their footsteps was a reminder that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. This is where their lesson begins, by the river, in the quiet, with two souls learning how to let life flow again. In the quiet rhythm of their simple life, Thomas discovered something unusual in the garden, a large, hollow gourd, light as air in his aging hands. With the patience of a man who had crafted tools all his life, he cut it open, cleaned it, and shaped it into a small bottle. He showed it to Grace with the pride of a child, and together they carried it to the river that afternoon. When Thomas placed the gourd on the water, it floated freely, bobbing in the gentle current as if it were born to dance there. Watching it made him laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in a long while. But then a sudden thought crossed his mind. I wonder, can I hold it underwater? Grace raised an eyebrow, amused yet puzzled. Still, Thomas pressed the gourd down, only to have it pop up again, with even greater force. Again and again he tried. Again and again it escaped him. It's in its nature to float, Grace said softly. But Thomas felt something stir inside him, a pinch of pride, a need to control even what wasn't meant to be controlled. And with each attempt, his frustration grew, not because of the gourd, but because of the battle inside himself. As Thomas stared at the drifting gourd, something stubborn awakened inside him. I can teach it to stay down, he muttered, tying a flat stone tightly to its cord. But the moment he lowered it into the river, the stone slipped free. The gourd shot back up, almost as if it were laughing at him. Thomas felt a heat rise in his chest, not anger at the gourd, but the familiar frustration of wanting life to bend to his will. How many times had he tried to control things far beyond his grasp time? Aging, the fears that visited him at night. Grace stepped beside him, her voice soft but steady. Thomas, you're fighting something that isn't your enemy. Ribetter, you're turning center. One placely to an entity. In center. One placely to an entity. End quote. You're turning center. You're turning centerty. You're turning center. 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 Her words settled over him like a breeze through the reeds, and for the first time, Thomas loosened his grip. The gourd leapt upward, free and effortless. Grace laughed, and this time Thomas laughed with her. They sat together on the riverbank, watching the gourd dance on the water, realizing that peace wasn't found in forcing things down, but in letting them rise as they were meant to. As Thomas sat quietly by the river, watching the gourd drift along the gentle current, Grace leaned closer and spoke in a soft, knowing voice. Do you remember, she asked, how we used to lie awake at night when our son was far from home? Thomas paused. He did remember those long, heavy nights when fear pressed on their hearts like a weight they couldn't lift. Back then, they fought their worries the same way he fought the gourd today, pushing them down, forcing them underwater, hoping they would simply disappear. But the more we tried to bury those fears, Grace continued, the stronger they became. They rose again, just like this gourd. Thomas felt her words settle inside him, not as criticism, but as truth gently revealed. Grace explained that real peace had only come when she stopped resisting her fear, when she let it move through her instead of battling it. Thomas lowered his gaze to the water, understanding now that the struggle was never with the gourd, nor with the river, but with the emotions he tried to control. And for the first time, he realized that letting fear rise and fall like the floating gourd might be the very thing that brings freedom. Thomas and Grace grow older but more peaceful and open-hearted. When Thomas returned to the quiet river the next morning, something inside him felt different, lighter, as if the water itself was teaching him how to breathe again. He dipped his hands into the cool stream, and the memory of the stubborn gourd rose naturally in his mind. From that day forward, whenever worry began to climb into his chest, he paused, closed his eyes, and spoke gently within himself. I see you. Your nature is to float. I don't need to hold you down. And just like the gourd rising to the surface, his anxiety lifted softly, without a fight. Grace noticed the change first. His shoulders weren't as tense, and his voice carried the calmness of someone who had stopped battling the invisible. Soon the neighbors noticed too. Thomas moves differently now, they whispered. Grace even looks younger. Some villagers nodded with understanding, sensing a wisdom in his transformation. Others laughed it off, unable to grasp how something so simple could bring so much peace. But Thomas didn't mind. He had learned something profound. Relief doesn't come from pushing life down. It comes from letting it rise, and letting ourselves rise with it. Thomas and Grace grow older but more peaceful and open-hearted. As the years passed, Thomas and Grace grew older, but something in them became lighter, softer, almost like the calm sky after rain. They no longer wrestled with worries the way they once had. Instead of forcing emotions down, they had learned to let them rise, move, and eventually drift away, just like the little gourd dancing on the river's surface. They began sharing this simple wisdom with anyone willing to listen. When you fight your feelings, Thomas would say, you only make them stronger. Grace would smile and add, but when you let them be, when you stop holding them under, they lose their grip on you. Some villagers understood immediately. Others laughed or shook their heads. But Thomas and Grace didn't mind. They knew that understanding has its own season, just like the river has its own flow. Their final lesson was gentle but profound. When we stop pushing our worries down, they stop pushing us around. They rise, they pass, and we are free again, open-hearted, peaceful, and finally able to breathe with life instead of resisting it.